Good day, I'm Vincent Saxtetter, and this is the After the Age of Fire channel. This is episode 44, recorded on May 2nd, 2026. It's How far can we go with nuclear self-destruction? So, how many billion people can we kill using nuclear bombs? This is a prepping channel. This is for you and for your family line to help you flourish and thrive and reproduce in the coming era. We're ending an era of 250 years of doubling, where the human race as a whole had twice as much resources and pretty much everything as they did every 22 years. So every generation had about twice as much. That's averaging, of course, averaging over the whole human race. Of course, some people had much more than others. Right now we have about 46,000 calories of energy per person per day, sourced mostly from coal, oil, and gas, and about 10% of that from other energy sources like hydro and solar and nuclear and wind. That's 46,000 calories plus another 15,000 calories from food, fodder, and wood, things that we grow. And in the coming era, it'll come down to something more like 30,000, so about half of what we have today. So still far, far more, hundreds of times more than what an average person had 250 years ago, but a bit less than we have today, something like the amount of energy per person that the human race had in 1970. That's the transition that we're going through, and this whole series and this channel is meant to help you prepare yourselves to go through that transition and to thrive in the new era. So we just ended episode 38, capped the first section of this channel, and that included a lot of discussion of all the energy sources and how much we can get from them long term. And then at episode 39, just 5 episodes ago, we started into the second section, which is about the transition from the growth era to the coming era. How to recognize it, how to see where we are in it. The focus here is more observational, to see what's going on around us and figure out how it fits in the overall pattern, rather than prediction. There is one prediction though, one very solid prediction so far, which is that this won't happen overnight. The transition from doubling every 22 years to reduced 30,000 calorie per person per day consumption won't happen in a year or two. It'll take generations. In the previous episode, we looked at the necessary question is, are we going to kill ourselves off as a race? Are we going to commit a racial suicide? It was necessary because before we start talking about a transition or about a future, we have to consider this possibility, because if we do commit suicide, we aren't going to have any future at all. And the answer was, we will not completely destroy ourselves as a human race. We do have an immense death wish, a real death wish that many of us must hold, because we keep trying to kill ourselves in every imaginable way, ranging from obesity to euthanasia to abortion to environmental destruction to bioweapons to nuclear war, and eugenics and genocides and all sorts of wars, and you go on, and then individual suicides. So we will go some distance towards killing ourselves, and we may kill perhaps billions of ourselves. In fact, there's already 2 billion dead of abortion in the last 50 years. But overall, we don't have the self-control to march for all of us to kill ourselves as all 8 billion people. We don't have the self-coordination, and the organization required to do that. And also we seem to be restrained by some intangible but real forces external to us that are greater than us, that are keeping us from killing ourselves for all our desire to do that. We evidently really do want to kill ourselves extremely badly because we keep trying so hard, but we're being held back somehow, and it must be something extremely powerful, far more powerful than us. So that was the gist of the last episode. Now this episode is a follow-on to talk about nuclear war specifically, and what we could do towards killing ourselves as a human race, and what we can't. And what we'll find is that we can kill billions, including just most people in our cities. In any city that is larger than between 100,000 or 200,000 people. So that's roughly 10,000 cities worldwide. We can nuke every one of them, and then we could kill several billion people, but we can't kill the whole human race. So that'll be the main conclusion, and I'll just work through the details in this episode to see how it works. So how do nuclear bombs work? They work by producing energy, and the way that they produce energy is very similar to the way that energy is produced in nuclear reactors. In fact, nuclear bombs use the same fuel as nuclear reactors. They use uranium and plutonium. Now some bombs add in one more fuel, which is hydrogen. Those are called fusion bombs. Now the difference is that the reactors keep the fuel spread out over a volume that's about the size of a bedroom, but a bedroom with an extra tall ceiling and extra meter of headroom, or another way of saying that is a 4 meter on a side and 4 meter high room. And they have 100 tons of uranium in that. The uranium could actually fit in a closet, so it's being held out a little bit far apart, like a sponge. It has a spongy setup inside of a nuclear reactor. And the reason why you don't have it as dense as possible is so that you can keep the reaction under control, and you can run a nuclear reactor for 50 years or more. And it just produces its energy relatively slowly. It produces a lot of it, not very slowly, but slowly enough that you can control it, more or less. Now, in contrast to a reactor where you have a lot of fuel spread out in a kind of a spongy way, in a nuclear bomb, you have, well, for a plutonium bomb, you have only 9 kilos of plutonium, and it's packed as closely together as possible. You have a plutonium bomb, and it will be about 10 centimeters, a ball about 10 centimeters wide, so about half the length of my hand here is enough to make a plutonium bomb. That's 9 kilos, half the length of my hand, and a ball about that size, so something like a baseball. Now for uranium, you need something more like 50 kilos of uranium, and it would be almost the length of my hand. Let's see, let's get my hand into the picture. So from the beginning of my hand almost to the fingertips, that's your uranium ball, and that's enough to make a uranium bomb. Okay, and you pack this small amount of material, 9 kilos of plutonium or 50 kilos of uranium, together in a ball, and because it's not in a spongy format like a nuclear reactor, its reaction goes much faster, and so it releases all of its energy, all of the energy that it's going to release in a microsecond. Okay, so in millionths of a second, and it's under no control at all. The only control is that you made the ball and you put it all in one place, and then once you've done that, all hell breaks loose. So very similar process. It's just that in one case you're holding back, you have your you don't have your foot on the accelerator, and on another one you have your foot pressed all the way down on the accelerator to make it go as fast as it can. Okay. So let's talk a little about the radioactivity that's produced by a bomb. The uranium, or by a nuclear reactor. The uranium in a nuclear reactor is, or in a uranium bomb, is really not very dangerous at all. In fact, people have painted their dinnerware, their plates with uranium paint, and as long as it doesn't chip and you don't eat the paint, it will have no effects on your health at all. Even if you did eat the whole dinnerware, say grind it up and mix it into a smoothie, even then there's a very small chance that it might eventually cause cancer in your body 30 years from now, but even that's not certain. Uranium, and the reason why uranium has such a low level of poisonousness is that the nuclear reactions that make uranium radioactive, these nuclear reactions happen on the scale of 1 in a billion years. So if you're looking at an individual uranium atom and you're waiting for it to break up into two pieces, in other words to fission, you'll wait around a billion years. Whereas the poisonous of something radioactive really depends on how fast that breakup happens, how fast they split up. So if you have something that splits up in a week, like iodine, certain radioactive versions of iodine, those are even extremely small quantities of iodine are extremely poisonous. If you have something like plutonium, where the plutonium that you would put in a bomb breaks up after 24,000 years, it's dangerous, but it's not the worst problem in the world. There's in fact, there are different kinds of plutonium. There are different kinds of uranium. Some fission faster than others. So one kind of plutonium, the kind that you would put in a bomb, fissions after 24,000 years. There's another kind that fissions after 375,000 years. These are important for thinking about what happens after a nuclear reactor melts down, or after a bomb blows up, and we'll come back to that just in passing later on. But overall, when you have something that fissions after 10,000 years, it's not your worst problem. In fact, there are many other dangers in your environment from things that are not radioactive that are far more worrisome, like car wrecks. The real concern is that is not the ingredients of the bomb. It's that when the bomb blows up, during the phase while it's actually reacting and producing the energy, it's converting some of its plutonium or uranium into other elements, and some of those elements are the kind that fission after a week or a month, or even a year, or some of them after hours, just a few hours. And these things that fission much more quickly, those are very dangerous. So if a bit of this stuff that has been converted from uranium or plutonium to some other element, if that lands on you, say a speck of dust from a nuclear bomb lands on you, that speck of dust may well be the sort of thing that can really hurt you. Now, about 10% of the energy that's produced by a bomb is actually not produced during the initial explosion, and instead it is produced by these conversions into other elements, and these other elements then over days or weeks or even months or years, gradually releasing their energy and radioactivity. Almost all of the energy will be gone in a few days. Almost all of the radioactivity produced by a nuclear bomb is already gone in a few days. So what we'll be doing is we'll be thinking about how much energy would be produced by nuclear bombs in a nuclear war, and how that compares to other sources of energy in our environment, and what that can tell us about how dangerous they are and who they can kill. We'll start with the number of nuclear bombs. There are somewhere on the order of 15,000 nuclear bombs worldwide, though not all are available for immediate use. So if you had one of these wars that we worry about, where all of a sudden somebody's nuking somebody and then 30 minutes later the whole world's been nuked, it wouldn't be all 15,000 bombs. It would be somewhere less than 10,000. So I take 10,000 as my number for the number of nuclear bombs that would be exploded worldwide, and that would mean one bomb for every 800,000 people. This is already 10,000 is more than you would blow up in one of these very quick wars. It would take time to bring all the rest of the bombs out of storage, and a lot of determination for every single country to decide to bring all of their bombs out of storage and use them. So we'll stick with 10,000. It's already probably an overestimate, and that's one bomb for every 800,000 people. And since if we look at the average amount of land worldwide for each person has on average 1.67 hectares, or 16,700 square meters of land, if it was distributed equally. And so 800,000 people would on average have a square of land that's 115 kilometers on a side. So you have one bomb for a square of land that's 115 kilometers on a side, and no bomb, no matter how powerful, that we've ever produced could possibly devastate a piece of land that is that big. Okay. On the other hand, many of us, around half of us, live in urban areas, and in general we have about 60 or 70 square meters per person of urban land. If you took 800,000 people and they all lived on urban land, then they would be living in a square that's 8 kilometers on a side. Okay, it'll turn out that, and I'll tell you about how this, some more about this, that one bomb can pretty well devastate a square that's 8 kilometers on a side. And so while our 10,000 nuclear bombs can't destroy all the land in this world, they can devastate our urban areas. And I'll go into more detail about that. But first we should talk about the size of these bombs. How much energy do they release? So we talk about, we measure the size of a bomb, the amount of energy released by a bomb, in kilotons of TNT. Now, it's not that a nuclear bomb contains any TNT, any dynamite. It's the amount of energy that it produces equal to some amount of dynamite. So a kiloton of dynamite is the same as a billion calories. And we measure bombs in kilotons of dynamite, of TNT rather. And in general, our bombs that we have available in ICBMs and rockets and things worldwide tend to be between 100 and 1,000 kilotons. You do have some that are smaller than 1,000, like you may have what's called tactical warheads that only have 3 kilotons or 5 kilotons, and then you also have some very large warheads that have 20,000 kilotons. That's what you call a megaton weapon. But in general, most of the warheads that we have today are somewhere between 100 and 1,000, often 100 or 300 or 500 kilotons. And the reason is, in fact, the warheads that we have today are generally smaller than they were 20 or 30 years ago. And the reason is that our rocket aim has gotten better. And when you have a better aim and you're trying to destroy a target, you don't need as big of an explosion. A good aim, if you're able to get in fact today, an ICBM might have a accuracy of a couple hundred meters, 100 to 200 meters, and previously the accuracy was much worse, and so you needed a bigger warhead to have a chance of destroying whatever you wanted to destroy, if it was a hard target, something buried underground. So you can look up on Wikipedia statistics about the warhead size for ICBMs. Those are the intercontinental missiles possessed by Russia and China and the United States. Also the ICBMs that are launched, those are also ones that the United States at least has both land-based and submarine-based ICBMs. And you can also look at the ones that are launched from bombers in the United States Air Force, and those numbers are public. And you'll find that in general they're in that range, around 100 to 500 kilotons. So I'll say 300 kilotons so I'll say we'll have a nuclear war where there's 10,000 bombs detonated, and each of them 300 kilotons. And then let's talk about how much energy that is. So as I mentioned, a ton of TNT, let's see, is a million calories. Let's see, is that right? A kilogram is a million is 1,000 calories, and a ton is a million calories. So that's the same amount of energy that's in 250 kilos of grain or wood. Okay, so TNT actually holds 1/4 the calories of grain or wood, or it's the same as in 115 kilos of vegetable oil. So using that and thinking that your average nuclear bomb has 300,000 tons of TNT, that's equivalent to then 75,000 tons of grain or wood, or 350 tons of vegetable oil, or a little bit less of gasoline. Is that right? Yeah. Let's see, did I say that right? 375, yeah. Okay, so 300. Another way of looking at it is 300,000 tons of TNT is the same amount of energy that is produced by a large-scale electrical power plant, say a nuclear power plant, or a coal-fired power plant, or a gas-fired power plant. A large-sized one will generally have a thermal power of 2.5 gigawatts and will produce somewhere around a gigawatt of electricity. So 2.5 gigawatts of thermal power running for 6 days is the same amount of energy as in 300,000 tons of TNT. Or another way of saying it is that you take your 300,000 tons of TNT and you divide them between 800,000 people. Remember, there's one bomb for every 800,000 people. That's 375 kilograms of dynamite per person. Okay. So certainly if you take 370 kilograms of dynamite and you put them next to each person in the human race, we will end up in everyone dead. Okay, but the secret here is that each human being, there's about 16,700 square meters of land for each human being. And so the human beings could be anywhere on the face of this globe, okay? And there's only 10,000 bombs. So if you want to think about 375 kilos of dynamite blowing up, you might think of it blowing up at some considerable distance from you, and whether it will still kill you. And obviously it may not. So 375 kilos of dynamite per person means it's about the same as 90 kilos of grain or wood per person, or 45 kilos of vegetable oil per person, or a little bit less of gasoline per person. So it's the amount of calories that we eat in 6 months. So when you blow up 10,000 nuclear bombs around the world, it's the same amount of energy as the human race would eat in 6 months. It's also the same amount of energy that the human race consumes in coal, oil, and gas and renewables in 8 days. So it's a considerable amount of energy, but it's not huge compared with the amount of energy that we deal with on a regular basis. If you want to look at how much energy is in the structures and possessions that we have, okay, well, it's probably the amount of energy that we have in our possessions and our roads, our buildings, our machines embodied in those things is comparable to the amount that we consume in a year or a few years, okay, and averaging across the human race, we consume 17 million calories per person per year, which is roughly equivalent to 17 tons of TNT per person. So that's much larger than the amount of energy that 10,000 nuclear bombs would release. That's 375 kilos. It's a fraction of a ton. It's less than half of a ton. But we go through 17 tons equivalent in a year. Okay, and so in other words, 1 year of our energy consumption is around 50 times more than the amount of energy that we would release with 10,000 nuclear bombs. So, and thinking that our possessions and our buildings and so on probably can contain the equivalent of some number of years. That means that our possessions contain on the order of 100 times the amount of energy that we would release with a nuclear war. Now, some of those possessions are burnable and some are not, so not all of that energy can be released, but certainly that's the amount that was required to make them, at least 100 times what's in a nuclear war. Okay, so if our possessions and our buildings and so on were evenly distributed across the face of the planet, then a nuclear war could be expected to produce a lot of damage, but since it's only releasing 100th or less of the amount of energy that was used to produce those possessions, we can expect, even though there would be a lot of damage, that only a small fraction of our possessions would be destroyed. There would be some fires, but only some. Okay. But of course, the fact is that we don't distribute our possessions or ourselves evenly across the planet. We concentrate ourselves in urban areas, in cities and towns. Let me go a little bit further, and again talk a little bit about the energy that's received by the land from the sun. Okay, each of us, as I mentioned, has 16,700 square meters, and on average, and and coming from the sun, that land, each person's 1.67 hectares, receives around 60 tons of TNT equivalent per day. The amount of energy that hectare, that 1.767 hectares receives from the sun is somewhere around 60 tons of TNT. And again, this is much larger than the amount that would be released in a nuclear bomb. I mean, averaging across the 8 billion people. So 60 tons of TNT versus 375 kilograms of TNT. That means that the daily amount of sunlight that we receive on this planet is 150 times more than the amount that would be released in a nuclear war. So since it's minuscule, it's less than 100th. So therefore, the direct effect of a nuclear war on our weather and our climate and the world's temperature is very, very small. Just the amount of heat released is small compared to the amount that we get from the sun every day. However, there are possible follow-on effects from a nuclear war, like the cloud structure might change and there might be soot left in the atmosphere for years on end. And then we might get effects on the climate and on the weather, but those would be follow-ons. Here I'm just talking about the direct effects of heating from nuclear bombs, quite small if you average them across the face of the planet. So far what I'm saying is that a nuclear war, a full-scale nuclear war, could devastate. Cannot devastate all of the world's land, and it cannot kill everyone. Okay, the amount of energy on offer from a nuclear war is something like 100 times too small. You would need 100 times more energy spread evenly to make a serious attempt at killing everyone. Even then, it wouldn't do a perfect job of killing everyone. You might need 1,000 times more, because some people would happen to be underground at the right time and have good luck and so on. But the fact is, of course, that we aren't evenly distributed across the land, and we concentrate ourselves in cities. So instead of thinking about one nuclear bomb for a square of land 115 kilometers on a side, let's think about one nuclear bomb on a square of city that's 8 kilometers on a side. So if you have a city that's bigger than 800,000 people, like a city with 8 million people, then you'd say, okay, this city gets 10 nuclear bombs. Okay. Now, of course, we don't have all cities. It's not that all of our cities have 800,000 people or more. We have many smaller cities and many towns. Okay. So if you look at the real statistics of the real cities that we do have today, then there are 700 cities that have 800,000 or more people, and those cities have between them 2 billion people. So we would allocate 2,000 bombs to those 700 cities. But then, if you look at the other bombs, the other 9,000 bombs available, then we'd find that they could only cover the cities and towns going down to a size of around 100,000 people. So overall, about 3 billion people would be covered by that 10,000 bombs, in fact, it's very unlikely that we'd spend all of our bombs on bombing cities. In fact, probably many of our bombs, or more than half of our bombs, would be spent on trying to destroy military targets like underground nuclear missiles. If you're trying to destroy the opponent's missiles, you'll aim for those. And but it's assuming that we did spend all 10,000 on our cities, then we could nuke all the cities down to a size of around 100,000 people. If we decide to spend only 5,000 on cities and then 5,000 on other targets, then we could nuke all the cities down to around the size of 200,000 people or more. In any case, we wouldn't be getting even all the 4 billion people who are in the urban areas. Right now, about 4 billion people live in urban areas, and another 4 billion people live in the countryside. And if you nuke all the cities down to 100,000 or 200,000 people, you'll still be living somewhere on the order of another billion in the remaining towns and small cities. So we could nuke around 3 billion people roughly in the world's cities, larger cities, larger than 100 or 200,000 people. Now in those cities, well, 80 square meters per person. That means the amount of sunlight per day is 320 kilograms of TNT equivalent, or 320,000 calories. And compare that to the amount of energy released per person. If that city gets a dedicated nuclear bomb, it would be 375 kilograms of TNT. Okay. So it's comparable to the amount of energy that city really receives from the sun in a day, okay, but the difference is that the nuclear bomb's energy comes all in a matter of seconds to a minute. There's at the center, everything happens in microseconds, and then the process of spreading out across the surface of a city would start very quickly, and most of the energy would be distributed within a minute. So it all happens. So you're getting much larger amounts of energy in that minute than it's extremely huge, and that's why nuclear bombs kill. And then in that same city, there'd be something like 17 million calories per person of possessions. That's 1 year's worth of consumption. So assuming that they keep a year's worth or more of their possessions and structures and so on, that means in addition to the 375 kilograms of TNT equivalent released by the bomb, there's another 17 million, or on the order of 17 to, or if it's 2 years, 34 million calories. And some of that can burn, okay, and that's a much larger amount than is actually released by the bomb. So there's plenty of fuel to multiply the energy effect of the bomb. So in conclusion, all 10,000 cities that would be targeted would be pretty thoroughly destroyed, and then just overall, you can talk about zones of destruction. There's an inner zone of pretty complete destruction, where every building is pulverized, and only people who are deep inside tunnels or special shelters may have a chance of surviving. And that zone will generally, depending on the size of the nuclear warhead, will generally be a 2x2, somewhere between 2 kilometers on a side square up to 4 kilometers on a side. So it'll be a substantial area in the middle of the city, and then the rest of the city will be in a second zone, an intermediate level of destruction, where small buildings above ground are completely destroyed. Large buildings are left standing, many of them, but have large bits of them smashed off. There are extensive fires, and perhaps a half of the population would die, and perhaps half of them would live, but under horrific conditions. So that's an intermediate level of destruction, and pretty much the whole city would be encompassed in other words, that zone of destruction goes out to 8 kilometers. Sometimes, depending on the size of the bomb, it might go out to 10 or 12 kilometers. So it might go a little bit beyond the city limits. And then out of that, beyond that, there's another zone with where windows break but few people die. That extends far beyond the 8 or 10 or 12 kilometers square. So a bomb per 800,000 people can pretty thoroughly destroy every city larger than 100,000 to 200,000 people, depending on whether we use all 10,000 bombs for cities, and would result in several billion people dead. And then I'll unpack how that destruction works, and the stage, all the different things that would happen when the city is nuked. I paused the recording for a while to check on the numbers again, and then with the numbers a little more firmly in my grasp, I'm starting in again, and I want to talk again about what I talked about in the last 2 or 3 minutes about different zones of destruction within a city. So we're talking about cities that have 800,000 people apiece, or if you have a larger city, then you break it into sections, each with 800,000 people, because each of those can get one nuclear bomb if you're using 10,000 nuclear bombs and using them all on cities. And I talked about 3 zones of destruction, as they're called, or zones of damage, and the inner zone, at least the way the U.S. government emergency response services talks about it, is called the severe damage zone. And then outside of that, there's a moderate damage zone, and outside of that, there's a light damage zone. And there's some technical meanings going behind that, and concerning the strength of the shock wave that comes from the blast, and the effects that shock wave will have on structures and on people. But there's all sorts of damage that occur, and so these are and they occur on a scale. So where you draw the line between what's severe and what's moderate and what's light is a little bit in the eye of the beholder, and also it might be severe in terms of one kind of damage and intermediate in terms of another kind of damage. So just bear in mind that these are rough. This is giving you a rough picture of the structure of damage to a city, and that there are all sorts of intricacies, and that many of these intricacies will play out differently for any particular city, depending on the weather, or depending on whether it has hills and valleys and things like that. So it's hard to predict ahead of time how they'll play out, and exactly where the severe damage zone ends and where the moderate damage zone begins, and so on. But this is roughly correct. So the inner part, the severe damage zone, would generally, and again I'm talking about an average size for a bomb delivered by our modern intercontinental missiles, which is average, I've said, is around 300,000 tons of TNT, the same amount of energy that's contained in 75,000 tons of dry grain or wood. Okay, so a 300,000 ton warhead with that's detonated at least 1,000 meters above land, above the earth. So it will generally cause a severe damage zone, which extends out to 5 or 6 kilometers square. Well, it actually would be more like a circle. But because I'm talking about square cities, I'll talk about square just damage zones. But it's roughly the same radius. If it's a 6 kilometer square, then it would be about a 3 kilometer radius. Um, uh, so, and then if you have a smaller bomb, that radius would get smaller. If you have a larger bomb, it would get bigger. So if you had a bomb that's if you had a much larger bomb, say 10 times larger, then perhaps the radius of the severe damage zone would be twice as big. So roughly a factor of 10 difference, a factor of 10 bigger makes this radius twice as big, a factor of 10 smaller makes the radius half as big. So I'm talking about 300,000 ton bombs, or 300 kiloton bombs, detonated above the surface, significantly above the surface of the Earth, hundreds or 1,000 meters above the Earth, and such bombs would pretty completely destroy everything within the severe damage zone, which would be roughly a 6 kilometers on its side, or a 3 kilometers radius. So inside that severe damage zone, pretty much every building would be pulverized. It could happen that some structures might survive. For instance, I forget whether it was Hiroshima or Nagasaki, even within this zone, a bridge across the river survived. I think at least one, maybe 2 bridges. So it could be that a few structures would survive, but pretty much any standing structure would not survive. It would be pulverized, and the only people that would survive would be people. In fact, some people would survive, but there would be people who would be deep inside tunnels or special shelters at the time of the explosion. And even those people there's so many things that go terribly wrong inside of this severe damage zone that even if they survive the initial blast, they may die sometime later of some other cause. So that's the severe damage zone, and you notice that this square the size of this zone is a bit smaller than the size of our 8 kilometer by 8 kilometer city. So not all of the city would be inside this zone. Then there's the next zone, that is actually bigger than the city, which is called the moderate damage zone. And again, assuming square circles, this would be roughly 11 kilometers on a side, or the radius would be 5.5 kilometers if you take it as a circle. So it does extend a bit beyond the city limits. In this zone, you have any small buildings not made out of reinforced concrete would be smashed, but larger buildings, or buildings that are made out of reinforced concrete, like modern apartment buildings, would be left standing, but bits of them would be smashed off, and they would clearly have some significant structural damage. You'd have walls smashed in, you'd have floors perhaps collapsed on top of another floor, and you'd have extensive fires, and all sorts of people would be damaged from the debris flying around, or stuck under, or things collapsing on them, or the fires, or the rest. So there would be a lot of people who would make it through, who would not die, but maybe half of the people, depending on where they are, might live in this zone. But a substantial fraction of them, maybe half of them, would die. So what I'm saying is that the core area of your city, and roughly half of the area of the city, of your 8 by 8 kilometer city, would be inside the severe damage zone. There pretty much everyone would die. The rest of the city and a zone extending beyond the city, this moderate damage zone, this would extend out to roughly 11 by 11 square, compared to the size of the city is 64. It is 8 by 8 kilometers, so roughly twice the size of the city, twice the area of the city, would be in this moderate damage zone, where all large structures, all above ground structures, would be significantly damaged, and where many people would die. Okay. Then outside of this moderate damage zone, you have the light damage zone, and that light damage zone would extend, again for a 300 kiloton bomb, it would extend roughly 3 times further, and in this zone few people die. Basically every window inside in this zone would be smashed. There would be light damage to structures, but in general the above ground structures would generally survive and intact, and and the people who do die in this zone would die from bad luck. It wouldn't be, most people would live through it. So this zone would extend out roughly a 30 kilometer by 30 kilometer square, or actually more like a circle, which you'll notice is still substantially smaller than the total land area that's possessed by these people. As I discussed before, 800,000 people have on average a square of land that's 115 kilometers on a side, and even this light damage zone just occupies a fraction of that. So that's the big picture. The big picture is that if we dedicate our nuclear bombs to cities, we can destroy the core of every city, and we completely destroy the core, and then we can create, and we can reduce, we can significantly damage the rest of the city and a zone extending beyond the city by a few kilometers. Now let's go into some details about how that damage would occur, so first I want to mention that there's a big difference, well, a significant difference between whether a bomb is exploded above ground, maybe 1,000 meters above ground, and a bomb that's exploded at ground level or near ground level. The one is called an air burst, and the other one is called a surface burst. You would generally, if you want to maximize destruction of things above ground or at ground level, you would use an air burst. The radiuses of destruction are a bit bigger for an air burst, maybe 20 or 30% bigger. So your squares are a little bit bigger. It might be 5 kilometers instead of 4 kilometers. So you kill more people, you destroy more things that way. But the reason why you would use a ground burst instead would be, even though you have a smaller area of the land area that's destroyed, is that when you have a ground burst, you're able to get at below ground targets, things that are buried, like missiles, or anything that somebody has decided to protect by putting it underground. Of course, if somebody builds a bunker that's a kilometer underground, or even probably a couple hundred meters underground, no size of a nuclear bomb will blow that up. So But if you're trying to do the maximum damage to some protected target that's been specially constructed to be resistant to bomb blasts, then you'll use a ground burst. In a ground burst, one significant difference between that and an air burst is that it produces a lot more fallout, a lot more immediate fallout, and a lot more danger, radioactive danger to the people near that explosion. An airburst, it does produce some radioactive material that's suspended in the air and comes down later on, but an airburst injects that radioactive material into the high atmosphere, and it doesn't come down for a long time, and it gets circulated around the world, and also by the time it does come down, a lot of the radioactivity is decayed. A ground burst starts raining fallout almost immediately, and it's very dangerous to people nearby. And I'll discuss that in a few minutes. So I'll just go through in sequence the different kinds of destruction and damage that happen when a nuclear bomb explodes, and and what kind of threats they pose to our lives and to the human race. Again, the whole point of this episode is really that we can kill some billions of ourselves, maybe 2 or 3 billion of ourselves with nuclear bombs, but we don't have any chance of killing us all. But let's just go through in sequence what the effects are. First, there's prompt radiation. In other words, nuclear radiation that is received immediately as the bomb explodes. Then there's burns from the light that comes from the nuclear bomb. Then there's the blast. Then there's the fire and heat that is produced. And then next, the radioactivity and fallout. And then next, possibly, some people claim that there may be a nuclear winter. And then another problem is that civilization itself may collapse, and we may no longer be able to work together to take care of our problems or feed ourselves. And then the last problem is perhaps there might be some genetic problems that may persist long term for the human race. So I just want to discuss each of these possibilities in turn. Some of them are certain, and some of them seem very unlikely. But let's just go through them. So the first one is the prompt radiation. So as the nuclear reaction proceeds, whether it's in a nuclear reactor or in a nuclear bomb, it produces radiation, and during the explosion this goes on for some millionths of a second. The radiation starts where the nuclear explosion is happening and just proceeds out at the speed of light out from there, but it's shielded by air. Air does get in the way of nuclear radiation, and you need a lot of air though, and also earth. 2 meters of earth is enough to shield you from a nuclear bomb. But a kilometer or 2 of air is enough to shield you also. So if you are close enough to the explosion to be killed by nuclear radiation, that means within a kilometer or 2 you're going to be killed by a number of other things also. So at least this is true for the size of nuclear bomb that I'm talking about, a 300,000 ton yield nuclear bomb. For this size of bomb, the nuclear radiation is really not something you need to worry about. If it's going to kill you, you're going to be killed by a number of other things also. You'll just be dead several times over. For a much smaller nuclear bomb, like one that has a yield of 1,000 or a few thousand tons of TNT, the kind that's called a tactical nuclear bomb, then you might have to worry about radiation even if you aren't being killed by the blast or the heat. And at any rate, even if you're right underneath the bomb, as long as you have a few meters of dirt and stone above you, the radiation won't kill you. The next effect is the burns that come from the light and heat that come from that bomb. So in the severe damage zone near the center of your city, the amount of light and heat is just massive, and anybody who's directly exposed to it will just die. There are famous pictures from the Japanese explosions where, for instance, I saw one recently where a little girl was jumping rope in front of a wall at the time of the explosion, and it left a silhouette of her, in other words, a photograph, a black and white photograph of her on the wall right in the middle of the jump. She received so much light and heat from that explosion that I guess she might have been dead immediately, or certainly she was dead very shortly after that, because within a fraction of a second it had delivered so much. In fact, there's like no blur in this picture. So a small fraction of a second, that light had imprinted her photograph on a wall. So you're close enough to the blast, to the explosion. The light and the heat from it will kill you. And then throughout not only the severe damage zone, but also the moderate damage zone, in other words, the zone that goes a little bit beyond the city limits out to a radius of maybe 6 kilometers or 11 kilometer by 11 kilometer square. In that zone, there will be so much light and heat delivered that there will be many fires started. Just anything that is exposed and is flammable may light on fire. In fact, also if you want the best, if you're outdoors and you're directly exposed to the fire, to the bomb, and you're in this zone, you'll probably get burnt. So it's best as soon as you figure out that something's going on, it's best to duck behind any cover you can get. And your clothes may light on fire. Anything else around you may light on fire, but just try to get behind some kind of cover, so something else will take the heat instead of you. Now, out far beyond this moderate damage zone, so tens of kilometers away from the bomb, there will be some fires lit, but not too many. It won't be as much of a problem beyond the moderate damage zone. They'll be more controllable. Inside of the moderate damage zone, there will be so many fires that it may be hard to control them. It can happen that they could coalesce and make super fires or firestorms, as they're called. It's not certain, but it's possible. I'll discuss that in a minute. Next, after the burns that come immediately and the fire starting, there's the blast. And in the central area, in the severe damage zone, in the center of the city, the blast will destroy basically all the buildings. It is possible to build a blast shelter in this zone. If you have one, it has to be built ahead of time. A blast shelter is more demanding than a radiation shelter. For radiation shelter, you just need a couple meters of dirt between you and the radiation. With a blast shelter, you need to have doors and and it has to have structural supports that won't collapse when the blast comes. But it is possible, even in the city center, very close to the center, to the explosion, to have a shelter that's strong enough that it will withstand the shock of the blast. On the other hand, if you don't have a shelter like that, you'll very likely die. And in this central zone, in the severe damage zone, the city will be turned into rubble. It could be tens of meters deep, and because it's rubble, even though it will have been exposed to a lot of heat and a lot of fires will have started, that they won't burn very quickly, and many of them will be put out as soon as the blast arrives, because they'll just be buried underneath other things. So you won't have as much of a you will have fires, but they won't themselves turn into the firestorm. What will feed the firestorm is outside. If there is a firestorm, it will be outside of this severe damage zone. Now, so going outside the severe damage zone to the moderate damage zone, so in other words, the zone that starts somewhere inside the city and goes a little bit past the city limits, there'll be extensive damage to apartment buildings. Small buildings will be flattened, and you'll still want to have a blast shelter. But in this zone, some people will survive even without being in a blast shelter. As I said, in this zone, maybe half of the people will survive, even if they're outdoors or somewhere inside their buildings. In this zone, because most buildings won't be destroyed, there'll still be plenty of fuel around available to burn, not buried under rubble, so that, and since fires will be lit everywhere, there is a chance that you could get a firestorm, and I'll come to that next. So so we've talked about the prompt radiation, the burns from the light and the heat, fires being started, and then the blast, and then now we come really to the fires. In the central area, in the severe damage zone, basically you're dead already, so there's no need to worry about fire or heat at this point. You're dead already unless you're in a shelter. Okay, if you are in a shelter, though, you do have to worry about fire and heat. But that worry goes not only in the severe damage zone, but also in the moderate damage zone. In other words, all the way through the whole city and a bit beyond, because at this point you could get a firestorm where all the fires that have been lit coalesce into a huge fire, like a forest fire, only much worse. And the fire will cause air to go up in the center of the city. Wherever the fire is burning, hot air rises, and therefore air needs to come in to replace the rising hot air, and so it will pull in air from outside of the city. So you'll have air rushing in from outside the city. This is if the firestorm happens. This is what a firestorm is. Air will rush in from outside the city at ground level. It will arrive at where the fire is, and then it will rise very quickly into the sky. And if it really gets going, then this air may be moving at hundreds of kilometers an hour. In other words, like hurricane speeds or worse. It may also be very hot as it's inside the city, and people may bake or boil in this air, including people in shelters. And the fire could also consume so much oxygen that there would be no oxygen left for people in their shelters or wherever to breathe. So they may die of not having enough oxygen, or there may be so much carbon monoxide and other things in the smoke that, or the smoke or the air, that people may die of carbon monoxide poisoning. So if this super fire really would get going, it's not certain that it would. Then the whole city itself basically could bake like it's in a very large oven, with hurricane force speeds and really no possibility of fighting the fire. So, on the other hand, it's not certain that a firestorm will occur. So, if buildings are made out of concrete and not wood, then that means that they don't burn as well. The firestorms that did occur, for instance, in Tokyo, and I think one of the atomic, maybe it was Hiroshima or Nagasaki, in those cities there was a lot of wood. The city was built out of wood, and so it burned very readily. If you don't have if the buildings aren't made out of wood, then it would be harder for the firestorm to get started. Also, in some modern cities, especially those in the United States, the modern United States city really sprawls out in a suburb style with houses far apart. Could be 20, 30, or even 100 meters apart between houses, and then you don't have the dense collection of fuel there that you would need to start a firestorm. So perhaps if your city were an American-style suburb city built mostly of suburbs, perhaps you wouldn't get your firestorm. Also, it would depend a lot on the weather and whether it's whether the ground is wet or dry, whether it's raining or not, and again, it would depend on whether you're in a rich country where rich people have a lot more possessions and a lot more burnable things, possessions with them, and so that they have a lot more fuel ready to burn. So you might not get a firestorm in say Calcutta or some other poor city than just because there's just not much fuel ready. If there was any fuel ready, it would probably have been used recently, been used already. So, in other words, there's a chance that there could be a firestorm, but it's not at all certain. If there is a firestorm, it could very well destroy the entire city. That's one more time beyond all the other destruction that has occurred by then. Now let's talk about radioactivity and fallout. If it's an airburst, in other words, the explosion is well above ground level, and that's generally what you would use for a city, unless you're trying to get at a hard target that's buried somewhere deep underneath the city. Then essentially nothing immediate would happen in terms of fallout. All of the radioactive material in the bomb would be vaporized into extremely small particles and would be carried up high into the air, where it would not come down for a long time. It might come down, well, it would start coming down, but slowly, and would take years. So, on the other hand, if it's a surface burst, so a place maybe aimed at a missile silo, then you'll get radioactive dirt coming down essentially immediately, and it will move with the wind. It'll be suspended in the air and falling through the air. But so over the next couple 3 days, most of it will come down, and the amount of radioactivity will be decreasing very quickly. But you could within the first 3 days after the explosion, for up to 100 kilometers downwind, you could have people, if you were even 100 kilometers downwind, somebody who stayed outdoors the whole time could end up being killed pretty quickly by that radiation. So you'll have this plume downwind, or another way of saying it is that perhaps that the area covered by that explosion, by that fallout, the kill rate, the area that actually could result in death if you didn't shelter, might be up to 1,000 square kilometers. So maybe 10 kilometers wide and 100 kilometers downwind, or 20 kilometers wide and 50 kilometers downwind. So in this area, you really, it's very important within. I mean, essentially, if you're close to the bomb blast, then essentially immediately you should seek cover so that this stuff doesn't rain on you. Or fall down on you, and you know, any cover is better than nothing, but it's better if you have a fallout shelter. But you know, just going to your basement or just going indoors is already better than nothing. But especially close to the bomb blast, within 10 kilometers or 20 kilometers, you could very well be indoors and still die. It does decay. This fallout does decay quickly. Within, well, already within a day, it's the strength of the fallout is a tenth of what it was an hour after the bomb, and within days, it's really it continues to decrease very quickly. Now there is some residual radioactive material that will be left on the ground, and some of that will persist, like any plutonium that's left over will persist for tens of thousands of years, just as happens after a nuclear meltdown. But essentially, well, first of all, a nuclear bomb contains only, a plutonium bomb has 9 kilos of plutonium, and a uranium bomb has 50 kilos of uranium. It's not nearly the same quantity as is in a nuclear reactor, and it will get distributed over quite a large area. So after even a week or two, people can move back into the city or around the city, and there may be some long-term slight increase in their chance of cancer, but even that is not certain. The long-term radiation hazard, you'll be able to measure an increase in radioactivity in this area, but it's not clear that it's not clear what kind of increase in cancer you would have, if any. The problem is that, and I think I mentioned this in my episode about nuclear reactors and nuclear meltdowns, is that the problem is that something like a third of us die of cancer anyway. So it's been very hard to measure increases of cancer from radiation, because you need to increase your chance of cancer. In order to observe anything, you'd have to increase people's chance of cancer by an amount that's similar to the number of people who die anyway of cancer. And if you produce that, if in fact we if you wanted to expose people to that amount of radiation, they'd just die immediately within a week or two. If they don't die within a week or two, then their chance of cancer increases by less than 1%, which is nothing compared to our chance of contracting cancer anyway. So it's been very hard to observe anything. So you can predict, if you claim that 1,000 people receiving a small amount of cancer, a small amount of radiation, have the same number of deaths from cancer as one person receiving 1,000 times as much radiation. So saying that radiation adds up between people, my radiation plus your radiation adds up. Then if you do that, then you can make predictions about certain numbers, a certain number of people dead from long-term radiation in the fallout zone. But that's based on some model, and in any case, the number of people that you'll predict died from that fallout long-term will be far smaller than the number of people in that area who die from cancer anyway, from natural causes. Okay, so in other words, it's really at least within 100 kilometers or less of the explosion. It's helpful to have a radiation, a fallout shelter. Basically, you need some way to keep the fallout off of you, and for some days at least, until it's safe to go outdoors. But after that, it's unclear whether there's any health effect at all. So next up, we've covered prompt radiation, burns, blast, fire, and heat, radioactivity, and fallout. Next, we'll talk about nuclear winter. As I mentioned before, the amount of energy that's released by a nuclear war with 10,000 warheads is less than 1/100th of the total amount of energy received that the Earth receives from the sun in a day. So it has no chance on its own of creating a climate change. The only way that it could create a climate change is if this small, relatively small thing triggers a big effect, sort of like a key opening a door, or a false step on a mountainside causing an avalanche. So the story that's been told for nuclear winter is that as a result of firestorms, there would be a lot of soot in the air, and the soot would hang out in the air for years, and therefore the air would, the world would be dark everywhere, and it would therefore get cold, and we wouldn't be able to grow anything. So we would have essentially very dark, overcast days every day for years, and nothing growing. And therefore, in this scenario, we'd all die, or many of us would die. And I don't think this is likely, and it seems very unlikely to me. It seems like this is a politically motivated story, a scare tactic, and I'll just discuss very briefly. For this to work, for nuclear winter to work, first of all, you need to have large firestorms at many cities. I already discussed why firestorms might sometimes not happen, or maybe often might not happen even after a nuclear bomb burst. It's not enough just to have the nuclear explosion. You also have a lot of fire and smoke, so a lot of stuff has to burn. Then the fires have to be very intense, they have to be very fast burning, and they have to last a long time, so that they can push large amounts of smoke and of soot high into the air, maybe 10 or 20 kilometers up from the surface of the Earth. Okay, and this didn't happen in any firestorm that we've seen. Typically, the firestorms that we have seen, whether created by us or forest fires, and did push their smoke up 3 or 4 kilometers into the air, but they didn't get anywhere near 10 kilometers. The reason why you want to push it up to 10, why it would have to go up to 10 kilometers or more, is that in order for nuclear winter to happen, you'd have to have this smoke up high where it would just essentially never come down, where the rain would, the main way of bringing the soot back down is rain, and if you had it high enough, then the rain clouds would not bring the soot down. So that's the point. So you have to get a very strong firestorm, like one that we've never seen before, and it would have to push the soot very far up. Okay, and so far that it would come down. It would take years and years to come down. And then you have to know something about the weather and about climate, so the next thing you need to know is that you have to be sure that clouds and precipitation don't bring down the soot anytime soon. Okay. So that requires a detailed understanding of how clouds work and how precipitation works. Then you also have to have some idea about how the soot would spread out from the individual plumes, from individual explosions, and eventually cover the whole Earth. And also you have to know about whether water was also carried up by these. In fact, water would be carried up. Water vapor would be carried up as far wherever the soot goes, wherever the smoke goes. Water vapor would come with it. And so if it makes it up to 10 kilometers, then you would get a lot of cirrus clouds up there, and those cirrus clouds actually might have the opposite effect. They might, even though they would block the sunlight, they might actually keep heat in to the Earth, and so might warm up the Earth. So instead of cooling the Earth, if the world's covered in cirrus clouds, you might actually get a bit warmer Earth. And then finally, with all these things, soot and clouds and all the other weather effects, that some of which we can predict ahead of time and some of which are unknown unknowns, you have to think about the climate changes that would occur and then come down on the side of the Earth turning into a snowball. So all of these are the ingredients of the nuclear winter scenario, and it's all a lot of theory and modeling, and since we've never done anything like this before and never seen anything like this happen before, it's all theory and modeling with very little supporting evidence. So, and if any link in the chain breaks, the whole story of nuclear winter breaks down. So with science in general, for every correct theory, there are thousands of incorrect theories, and scientists and whole communities of scientists go on for decades or centuries generating incorrect theories until, with amazing good luck, they may finally hit on a good one. For instance, to understand how heat works and how heat moves from hot things to cold things, there were the stories that were told and were accepted as good science for centuries look just amazingly inventive and childish to modernize. But they were done by serious scientists and believed in. So here we have a preponderance of theory and almost no evidence. And if you take the standard of success in science is that for every correct theory, there are 1,000 or more incorrect theories, and so in all likelihood, this theory is incorrect. In fact, it was politically motivated. Nuclear winter was promulgated in 1983 by Carl Sagan, who was a celebrity of the time, and some friends, some other scientists. One of them, who I'll pick on, I don't know why, is Alan and they talked about how the whole world would be plunged into darkness and cold. Then in 1991 there was the first Gulf War, and during the Gulf War hundreds of oil wells were set on fire deliberately, producing all kinds of smoke and soot. And so immediately the authors, the people behind Nuclear Winter, predicted that the coming year would be a year without summer, and that there would be so much smoke in the air that we wouldn't have a summer. Well, the weather that summer was normal, and so from 1991 until 2003, for 12 years, none of these guys spoke up about nuclear winter anymore, because what had happened was that the smoke from these oil wells didn't go very high, and it got rained out very quickly, maybe downwind for some hundreds of kilometers. There was some effect on the weather, but it just didn't go high in the atmosphere. It didn't stay up there, and nothing happened. So that pretty much discredited their theory until 2003, 12 years after, but in the meantime Carl Sagan had died, but this Alan Robach and some others began publishing again from 2003 until today. They continue to publish. There's not very many of them, but they come out with probably a few papers a year, or one. There's very little literature being generated, and it's very few scientists working on it, and they're funded by a Facebook billionaire, and they're clearly doing it for political reasons. In fact, in 2023 they published an article that said, I think this is in the title, "How Fear of Nuclear Winter Has Helped Save the World So Far." So they evidently feel very proud of themselves. This is about politics. It's a power grab. It's a theory. So that's what I have to say about nuclear winter. It's probably and there's a few other things. Even if we did have a nuclear winter, there may be ways to get food anyway. In fact, there have been some papers published about how you might get food by doing a lot of farming of kelp in the sea, or if you took wood, either wood that's already, trees that have already died, or trees that you cut down and you let them rot and let grubs and mushrooms grow in them, then you could eat the grubs and the mushrooms. Or maybe you could mine the soil for worms, and any of these might easily produce enough calories and enough protein to last us for years, if we were determined. So it's not necessarily clear that even if there were a nuclear winter lasting some years, that we would die of starvation in the meantime. So next up is, after nuclear winter, is a collapse of civilization. Maybe our trade networks would collapse, and maybe our agriculture would collapse. Even without nuclear winter, if you lose all your big cities, and then maybe everything would descend into chaos, and we would no longer have the things that we consider necessary to get anything done. And especially to feed ourselves. We wouldn't be able to grow things or move food around, wouldn't be able to operate our machinery. And it seems to me like this is a lot of maybes, and I think under pressure we could probably, if most of half of us would still be alive. We might be shell-shocked. We would be shell-shocked. But we could work out ways first of all, we could grow things pretty much anywhere after the first 2 weeks after the explosions, and then we could. It's a matter of getting the food from wherever we are, in fact, you could even take crops that are already in the ground and growing, and you could still eat them after a few weeks after the fallout, except for maybe very close to the explosions. Just have to be a little careful about monitoring the radiation levels. Trade networks would certainly be disrupted. Probably, I'd guess, we'd lose our ability to make smartphones and computers, at least computers similar to the ones we have right now. Probably those abilities would go away for a while. But so maybe we'd be pushed back 50 years or 30 years technologically, at least in some respects. But it doesn't look to me like it's like we necessarily stop being right now. Part of it is right now we grow, and our crops are something like 10,000 calories per person per day, maybe 11 or 12,000, which means that we're growing 5 or 6 times as much food as we actually consume, as we actually need, and most of that is going to our cattle. A little bit is just being thrown away. Maybe an amount that's equal to the amount that we eat gets thrown away on the way to us. And when you're oversupplied with food in this way, you can have a substantial reduction in your ability to produce food and still not starve. It's just a matter of whether you choose to distribute the food to the people who need it. So, right now we could still have mass famines if half of the world decided to keep all the food for itself and prevented the other half of the world from keeping the food. But it doesn't have to happen this way. And in fact, right now we do have some large famines, but not too many right now. And perhaps the likelihood of famine would increase in a world with a bit less food, but I don't see that nuclear war means that our ability to produce food is going to divide by 10. I don't see any reason why that should happen. Maybe, and if it divided by 5, well, that would still be inside the margin. I mean, we would still if we divided our food production by 5, we could just not feed our cattle for a year or two, and we'd have enough calories for ourselves. Then the last thing to consider, we've talked about prompt radiation, burns, blast, fire and heat, radioactivity and fallout, nuclear winter, the collapse of civilization. Lastly is genetic long-term problems. And it's remarkable, but there's no evidence so far from any of the radiation releases that we've generated so far that radiation can cause any increase in our genetic defects. Part of it is that, as it is, a few % of our children have genetic defects anyway. So it's really hard to observe any. You would need a huge amount of radiation to observe a marked. In fact, you'd probably have to kill most of the people in a population with radiation before there would be any chance that you would see an observable increase in the number of genetic defects, because we have so many anyway. So there's no sign that there would be any long-term increase in our genetic defects. We've exploded more than 500 bombs above ground during the 50s and 60s for nuclear testing, and at present those nuclear bombs the amount of radioactivity remaining is about 2%, and 2/100ths of the amount of radiation that comes to us naturally from other sources anyway. And even at the height of the nuclear testing, just before they broke it off, there wasn't much. And so you could explode all 10,000 bombs, and the total long-term radiation would be minuscule compared to the amount of radiation that we receive anyway. And it would just be impossible to observe any And so far we haven't observed any increase in genetic defects. So these are all the kinds of death and destruction that could occur, that would occur after a nuclear war, during a nuclear war. And so overall we would have a lot of, billions of people dead in our cities, maybe 2 billion, maybe 3 billion, but that's with using a full 10,000 bombs, but we aren't going to kill us all. Nuclear winter is extremely unlikely, and collapse of civilization. We may have a regression of some of our technological abilities, but collapse is another thing. This isn't going to be the reason for collapse. Genetic long-term problems probably will be zero. So let's just wind up. Overall, what we can think a little bit about what would make a particular place or a particular country more resilient against nuclear war. Well, I think a country or an area that has less cities, that spreads out its people more equally across its land area, will be much more resilient. If you had a country or a continent where no city was larger than 100,000 people, that country would be extremely resilient against nuclear war. And another thing that helps is if there's less energy use. If you have less energy lying around in your houses and in your possessions and your vehicles and so on, ready to burn. So if you have less burnable material on hand, that really decreases the impact of that nuclear bomb. Another thing is, right now at least, if you want to live in a place that's resilient, a good choice would be to live south of the equator, because most of the bombs, as it is today, will land in countries that are north of the equator. Probably almost all of them. The countries that have the large arsenals and aren't interested in nuking each other are north of the equator. Also, the fallout, the radioactivity weather patterns tend to not mix very quickly between the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere. So the northern hemisphere will get more of the radiation. So overall, if you want to find a place that's a good place to live, well, you can always build your fallout shelter, your bomb shelter, and stock up. But and you can choose to live as far as away from any missile silos, or any other hard targets, so that and you could choose to live outside of a city, maybe in a small town, or maybe just in the countryside. But maybe you would choose to live in a country that that's less likely to be nuked, or a country that's more spread out, or a country that has less fuel and less property on hand to burn. So one more question is, why, if 10,000 bombs doesn't do it, and if we're so interested, and we do evidently have a death wish, why haven't we built 1 million bombs? And 1 million or 10 million bombs. I'm sure we have enough money to build 1 million bombs and maybe 1 million missiles. That probably still wouldn't quite do it for killing us all. There would be some lucky few who could be underground at the right time. But maybe 10 million bombs would do it. But a much cheaper way would be, of course, for everybody to just concentrate themselves in large crowds and wait for the bomb. Okay. Anyway, why don't we build 1 million? And I think the essential reason is that while we may have a strong interest in killing ourselves and killing each other, we don't have the self-control to make it happen. We're not willing to organize ourselves in that way. If we did build a million, or somebody started working in that direction, everyone would notice, and and enough of us would say, no, 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 do not do this, that we wouldn't finish the job. Or another way of saying it is that there's some strong restraining force that keeps us back. So we may go part way with killing ourselves with nuclear bombs, or with many other things that I've mentioned, but we won't go all the way. Complete self-extinction is not in the cards with nuclear bombs or any other way, because we just aren't willing to take it to the last throw. Or if we are willing, we aren't. As a group, we're not organized enough to do it. We could do it equally well just by all 8 billion of us lining up for our cups of cyanide, but we're not willing. We're not organized enough. Thank God. Really, thank God. So that's it for self-destruction, and especially nuclear self-destruction. Next week we'll be on to other. Again, we're in the section of this content that's about looking at where we are in the transition to the new era without the doublings and with a bit lower energy consumption. Then in the next weeks we'll be talking about fake growth, which means ways that we may be appearing to grow our consumption and our economy and our well-being but it may just be appearances. It may not be the real thing. So I'll discuss that in the next weeks. In the meantime, have a great week. I hope that this has helped you not live in terror or foreboding, but maybe in reasonable preparation and thinking about how to care for yourself, your family, and the people around you appropriately, given that there is a substantial chance that we may have a nuclear war sometime soon, but knowing at the same time that it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to die, or that the whole world will be plunged into nuclear winter or so on. Okay. With that, I wish you the best. If you know of anybody who's interested in this content, please invite them to join in, and keep coming back. Hey, I forgot something, so this is a postscript. There's a very good book that will help you prepare to best protect yourself and your family and friends in the event of a nuclear war. It gives instructions about how to build practical, cheap, very doable protection for yourself, shelters from bomb blasts, shelters from radiation, and all the other things you need to think about to prepare for surviving a nuclear bomb blast or the fallout. And I just wanted to this is not a paid advertisement at all. This is originally written, I think, by Crescent Kearney, and then updated by Stephen Harris. I think that there's a version of this available for free online, but certainly you can get this very cheaply from Amazon. It's very, very good, and I think it's the best there is. Nuclear war survival skills, and I just recommend it to you. To just give it a read. It'll give you something to think about, at least, and you'll think about what is the best things you could do to prepare yourself. So I think it's very. I can't recommend it strongly enough, because at least it will lead you through thinking about it. There's plenty of other materials that you could read. Like I've been looking at some materials from the U.S. government that for their emergency responders and their fire departments and so on, about what they would do, and I'm sure if you look, you'll find even more. But this puts a lot of practical things in one place. So, with that, I wish you the best. I hope you have a great week, and take care.